Toronto FC has announced their 2022 end-of-season roster moves, and quite a bit of questions have been answered. First off, both goalkeepers, Quentin Westberg and Alex Bono, are out of a contract, and both will not be returning to Toronto FC next season. This was the big question that we wanted answered going into the end-of-season roster moves. Was the goaltending situation the past 2-ish years have been pretty suspect. Alex Bono has been looking like a shell of his former self, and Quentin Westberg, well, having some flashes, seems to be often injured, often not having his head fully in the game. When he's on his game, he's better than Bono, but it's just a matter of consistency with him, and he hadn't really been consistent. And so everyone knew that TFC needed a new goalkeeper for sure, a new starting goalkeeper for next season, but some people thought that, maybe one of these two guys may be kept around as a backup. Maybe Westberg on a cheaper salary could be kept around as a backup, as a mentor figure. Could have been possible, but no, both of them are gone, and I think this is in fact the right choice. Neither of them are working. Why not start fresh and anew? In addition, both Daniil Henry and Noble Okello are without contract for next season, and also both will not be joining the club. Henry makes sense. He was brought on and didn't really add anything to the TFC back end, didn't improve it in any way. So he is gone. He still is on contract with MLS and will be on the waiver wire, but he will not be returning to Toronto FC next season. It'll be interesting to see if this plays any effect in John Herdman's decision on whether or not to bring him to Qatar for the World Cup. Noble Okello, on the other hand, is the only real major surprise in the list of guys who were announced as not returning for me. Okello is an interesting young player, 22 now, who had injury troubles this season, missed a lot of time with an injury, and he had flashes back in 2021, just couldn't recover those when he came back from injury this season. And now at the age of 22, it seems like TFC has decided that the Noble Okello experiment, after 4 years of him being in and around the first team, is done, and Okello will not be returning for next season. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up. He's a guy who has potential to be a massive figure in the Canadian Premier League next season going forward, and could use a CPL job to spring his way back into MLS, or honestly, he could be a guy who another MLS team picks up just as a depth option. Be interesting to see where Okello lands. In terms of contract options, there were 3 guys who had contract options. Themi Ethnoglu, who got his first MLS minutes in the last game of the season for TFC, had his option accepted, so he will be back for TFC next season. Ifeanyi Achara had his option declined and is announced he will not be back with Toronto FC next season. Achara is a player who had some injuries early on in his TFC career that derailed what could have been a great start, and then he kind of fell into a useful-ish winger/forward in MLS, but not useful enough to justify taking up an international roster spot, which by virtue of him being Nigerian, he does. So Achara is kind of left in this weird middle ground of, like, you're probably good enough to be a bench player in Major League Soccer, but you're not a domestic player, which makes it difficult. And so this move makes sense purely for the opening up an international roster spot, because I liked Achara, but he just didn't develop fast enough and didn't really grow into what an international roster spot taking up player needs to be in MLS. The third contract option, sticking with international players, was Chris Mavinga. Now, Mavinga is interesting because his contract option was declined, but TFC said they're still open to having contract discussions with him to bring him back next season. Now, it makes sense. This season, Chris Mavinga was making almost $1 million, or around $1 million. So against the salary budget, that is a lot of money. And Mavinga, well, 3 years ago would have definitely been worth that. 3 years ago, he was one of the most underrated defenders in MLS, and maybe one of the most underrated players in general in MLS, and was one of the better defenders in MLS. But his past couple seasons, he's just been constantly plagued by injuries, not playing up to his usual self when he's here, just has a lot going on, and he seems not fully in the game. And really, he's just been a shell of his former self. Now, with the way he's been playing, of course, $1 million salary really is not worth it. But if we can bring that salary way down and then bring him back as, like, a number 3 center back, like the first sub off the bench center back, I'm perfectly happy with that. I feel like Chris Mavinga definitely could still be a useful defender in Major League Soccer, just not as a regular starter. And if he gets a contract that more accurately represents that, I think go ahead and keep him around. Why not? It's easier than finding another center back to fill out that kind of backup center back role. The last guy with contract stuff going on, Jonathan Osorio. Osorio, as we all know, has his contract coming up at the end of this season, and TFC TFC has said that yes, we are still in talks to keep him around for next season. However, Jonathan Osorio, we know, does have interest from Europe. There was already an offer from Panathinaikos in the Greek league to get Jonathan Osorio back in the summer. Osorio declined, stating that he wanted to wait until after the World Cup because he thinks that going to the World Cup for Canada after the World Cup is going to be the January transfer window for European clubs, and he's going to have an opportunity to showcase himself at the World Cup and get a contract with a bigger team in Europe. Now, the fact that he's already gotten an offer from a European team and turned it down shows that the opportunity to go to Europe is there for him. So unless TFC offers him a ludicrous amount of money to stick around and there's no offer from Europe that he likes, both of which seem highly unlikely, I don't see Jonathan Osorio being back with Toronto FC next season. I think he has a plan. He knows he's going to go to the World Cup. He's probably going to perform well at the World Cup, and then he's going to go get a contract offer somewhere in Europe that's pretty solid. So best of luck to Osorio on that, but unfortunately, yes, this looks like the end of Osorio's tenure at TFC. And lastly, the loan guys. Jacob Shaffelburg currently on loan to Nashville SC. It sounds like from what Bob Bradley said, even though it wasn't made official, Bob Bradley stated in a press conference earlier this week that they're expecting that Shaffelburg's loan will be made permanent. So it looks like Jacob Shaffelburg is leaving the team to join Nashville full time. And the other loanee is Aro, who I think we all forgot about a little bit this season. Aro has been on loan with Santos in the Brazilian league from TFC all season. His contract ends at the end of this year, but because he's on loan, we have a bit more time to decide whether or not to pick up his option for next season. I would expect Aro does not return. I feel like when Bob Bradley came in, that was kind of the decision that Aro's time at TFC was over, and that's why we loaned him out for this season for the last year of his contract. I would expect Aro does not return. If he does, that would be quite surprising, but most likely not. So where does that leave TFC for next season? Well, first off, we know 100% we're getting goalies. We are getting 2 new goalies for Toronto FC next season. It'll be interesting to see who we pick up. In addition, with the loss of Okello and the big question mark around Jonathan Osorio, we only have 4 midfielders on contract for next season, and that's if you include Jaden Nelson as a midfielder, so really 3.5 midfielders on contract for next season, which means definitely something big has to happen in that midfield role, because right now we have Bradley, Kay, and then Thompson and Nelson in the midfield, and Thompson and Nelson I'm not 100% solid on yet to be regular midfielders in a 4-3-3. Hell, we all know I'm not even sure about Michael Bradley. I feel like we need a replacement for him ASAP, but I feel like Bradley's going to have at least one more season as a regular starter for TFC in him. Defenders, the center back mess needs to be fixed, but we already knew that. That's nothing new. Daniil Henry leaving is kind of expected. Honestly, I'm surprised that Daniil Henry so far is the only defender that we've made a solid they're leaving decision on yet. And up front, the wingers are settled. We know it's going to be Insigne and Bernadeschi going forward. And the striker position, we still have Jimenez and Akinola. It's going to be interesting to see what we do there, because neither of them really performed up to par this season, especially once we got Insigne and Bernadeschi. You'd think getting 2 elite wingers would improve your strikers, but they got worse somehow. So I don't know, something needs to give in the forward position. I'd assume we're getting a new guy there, and at least one of Akinola or Jimenez are getting shipped out. So yeah, that is it for this video. Let me know down below in the comments what you think these roster moves are going to mean for Toronto FC going forward. And as always, if you like this video, hit like if you want to see more of my stuff. Hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.